Today, I'm in London, England, so let's do some exploring. Hello, y'all. I'm Miss World, also known as Casey, and my goal is to travel around the world in style and on a budget. Today, I'm doing something a little different. In this video, I'm going to take you on a walking tour through London's Whitechapel neighborhood. We will dive into the history of Whitechapel's most infamous, Jack the Ripper himself, and we'll learn more about this area along the way. So journey with me to London and play the video from this point while you're standing at the Whitechapel Gallery, which begins at 77 Whitechapel High Street. The tour takes about 90 minutes and we will be walking, so get prepared and join me on a trip through history. When you're ready to start, begin the video again and start walking east. We're standing in front of Whitechapel Gallery, a building that has served artists in London's East End since 1901. The gallery has 9 exhibition spaces, and the building also houses the Whitechapel Public Library. None of this was here in Jack the Ripper's time, but the street we're walking on right now, Whitechapel High Street, certainly was. Once a part of the Roman road that connected the city of Londinium with the rest of England, it was known as Aldgate Street, because it extended from Aldgate Street. In the 1400s, alehouses filled this street, something that was also common in the much later era when Jack himself walked this very path. By then, Whitechapel High Street had become locally famous for its Haymarket, which saw carts and farm wagons rolling down the road on a daily basis. Back then, you would hear the sound of wagon wheels rolling down the street. You might hear a horse neigh, or the sound of one hay merchant calling out to another. This was a busy, crowded part of London, and it would become more densely packed as a man known only as Jack the Ripper started to become very familiar with this street and all the other shadowy streets of Whitechapel. Perhaps he walked where you are walking now. We do not know who he was, but we know the kind of thoughts he had. So if you feel a creeping chill on your neck, that's not the London weather. That's the whisper of a memory that still haunts these streets. Whitechapel High Street is also where the Whitechapel Bell Foundry operated. As you can see as we approach, the building is still here. It closed in 2017 after operating for nearly 250 years. It was here that London's most famous bell, Big Ben, was recast. In fact, many of London's church bells were made right here. It's chilling to think that while people inside this building were hard at work making bells for the city's churches, a monster stood outside the doors with nothing but evil in his heart. All the ringing bells in London could not fill his ears and heart with joy. This was a man who knew only rage and hate. Another world-famous bell that was struck behind these walls is the Liberty Bell. Well known in the United States for the huge crack that mars it, the Liberty Bell, also known as the State House Bell, has become an important symbol of freedom in the U.S. despite the crack. And honestly, the bell is even more famous and distinct because of it. Today, the bell hangs in the Pennsylvania State House, which has become known as Independence Hall. The building itself remains as an enduring symbol of the neighborhood, and it is a testament that this was much more than a place of horror and misery. Many London residents called Whitechapel home, though after the murders, some people called it hell. In 1888, the year when Jack the Ripper walked these streets, this business and many others were operating in Whitechapel. Queen Victoria was on the throne, and London was on the brink between two eras. Industry was starting to boom, and the city was becoming modern, perhaps too quickly for its citizens to keep up. Modern ways of thinking and modern ways of making things were starting to spread. But so too was the evil inside one man, who carefully stepped where we are stepping, with eyes alert and watching. Watching. As we turn left on Valence Road, imagine the hot and heavy air of an August night in London, 1888. A thriving hub of industry by day, Whitechapel has a very different face at night. There are pubs scattered throughout the neighborhood, boarding houses that rent by the hour, and people who have exhausted all their opportunities in life, if they ever had any. Just blocks away, the streets of the finance district boasted fancy shops and big banks, profitable businesses, and lovely homes. Whitechapel could not be more different. Listen closely. Listen to the sounds beneath the sounds of the modern city. You may still hear the ghosts of the sounds Jack would have heard as he walked under the cloak of night, another person indistinguishable from the rest. Bursts of drunken laughter may spill onto the street from one of the pubs. Overly friendly, high-pitched female voices may call out to male passers-by. Perhaps there is shouting, an angry couple, or two overserved men getting into a dispute that will be forgotten by morning. As we turn right on Durward, we are retracing the steps of the man known as Jack the Ripper, but we are also following the footsteps of Marion Nichols. This street used to be known as Buck's Row, and it was here, shortly before 4 in the morning on the last day of August, the first known Ripper victim was found. Known as Polly, she was last seen at 2:35 a.m. walking along Whitechapel Road to where we are now, the street once called Buck's Row. The area was used often by women of the evening, and on this summer night, it was used by Jack for his gruesome business. Polly was found lying in a stable yard, now at 35 Durward Street, her throat cut. The constable who discovered her had no way of knowing he was standing between two distinctly different time periods, the time before Jack and the time after him. Walk with me now the way we came, toward Court Street, and turn right onto Valence. Polly was 43 years old. Her birthday was 5 days before she became the first known Jack the Ripper victim, the first woman in what is now known as the Canonical Five. She was born in London, and she is buried in the City of London Cemetery. Turn left on Hanbury, and take a right to stay on Hanbury as you walk with me through the streets. In the days following the murder, one of Polly's female colleagues identified her body, which was autopsied and examined. Inspectors went to the area where her body was found, but the only potential evidence they could find nearby was a dark stain, which may or may not have been her blood. No one knew the terror that had only just begun, or that Whitechapel would soon be etched onto the pages of history in a bloody scrawl, signed Jack. As you look around today at the people going by and the lively nightlife, it's hard to imagine that once you couldn't hear the roar of engines on the roads. There were no airplanes flying overhead. You would hear the clip-clip of horses, the sound of wooden wheels being dragged down the road. Perhaps a piercing scream cut short. Screams were nothing new in Whitechapel. Petty crimes like pickpocketing and robbery were not uncommon. You would be wise in those days to stay near the street lamps and avoid the dark, narrow alleyways. Only the brave or foolhardy, or those who wished to remain unseen, would dare venture into the shadows between buildings. Here in Whitechapel in 1888, lodging was cheap and the ale was cheaper. If you were lucky, you could afford your own bed for the night in a tiny, cramped space that most people today would find unfit to be a clothes closet. If you couldn't afford enough space to lay down in, you could pay to sleep on a rope. That's not a euphemism A rope would be tied across the room from one end to the other, and you could sit up with your chest pressed against it and your arms hanging over. That's how you would sleep. Even that was a lucky circumstance here. Having a place to sleep was not a regular thing for most of the people who frequented these streets. Every day was a new challenge, a new set of difficulties. You would wake up, perhaps on the rope, on a tiny bed, or maybe even in an alley, and wonder if today you could make enough money to afford a meal. You'd go to sleep hungry most of the time. This was the life that Jack's victims lived. We don't know how Jack lived, where he lived, how often he ate, whether he went to sleep hungry. But we do know these normal creature comforts did not drive Jack. He was not walking the streets looking for ways to make money. He was looking for victims. And of the known victims, with one notable exception, all these women shared commonalities. All had the same profession as women who were temporary wives and girlfriends for an hour or two a night. They had all been largely forgotten and skipped over by society, left to their own devices and their own ends. All were in their 40s, with the one exception, and all would have likely been forgotten forever. Just more names among the nameless of Whitechapel. Jack would write their names in history, but it's doubtful they would want to be remembered as famous victims. They were women living in a world that did not prize women. They were Whitechapel. Turn left onto Spellman and follow it to Princelet. When you find yourself at the corner of Brick Lane, turn right. Take a left on Hanbury Street and walk toward the taco restaurant. This lively, bright area sits right on top of a horrifying memory, a brutal ghost that remains at 29 Hanbury Street, the place where Annie Chapman was found in a backyard. She was seen at 1:35 a.m. on September the 8th, barely a week after Polly was found murdered. Annie ate a baked potato at her boarding house, which was right ahead of us at number 29 Hanbury. But when it was time to collect rent for the night, there was a problem. Annie was short. She said she would get the money and to hold her room for her. Annie was seen alive and well, walking away from this spot in the direction of Spitalfields Market. She almost made it back to her room, but Jack had a different plan. He found Annie before Annie could find her bed for the night. Annie was last seen at 5:30 in the morning, talking with an unidentified man. The pair were seen by Elizabeth Long, who knew Annie, but she never saw the face of the man. She only saw his back. Just moments later, a young carpenter heard a man and a woman's voices near 27 Hanbury Street. The only word he could make out came from the woman, who said, "No." It was, perhaps, the last syllable Annie Chapman ever uttered. Her body was discovered shortly before 6 a.m. Her throat and abdomen were deeply cut, and smears of blood surrounded her. Annie was literally killed in her own backyard. Jack's crimes are still studied and remembered today, the crime scenes detailed in explicit descriptions. We will not be getting too detailed on this tour. Suffice it to say that Jack stood out for his brutality. To put it mildly, he was a butcher. This is why his name became known and is remembered. But murder was not an uncommon crime here in Whitechapel. There were many other unsolved murders that year and in the years surrounding it. However, no one had ever seen the level of violence that Jack displayed. At least, not then, and not in London. Many other monsters have followed him since, many who outperformed him in both violence and in numbers. Jack is only officially credited with 5 murders, and yet his name is synonymous with that terrifying phrase, serial killer. Annie Chapman was 47 years old. She was born in London and is buried at Manor Park Cemetery. She had been staying at the lodging house for several months prior to her murder and seemed to get on well with the keeper and the other tenants. She was known to drink a bit too much too often, like many people who called Whitechapel home. Head east now toward Brick Lane and take a left to go up Brick Lane. This street is where the world-famous Truman Brewery Market stood. Once the largest brewery in London, it supplied beer to royals and regulars alike. The original brewery was built around the year 1660 at 91 Brick Lane and stayed open and in business until 1989, which is a heck of a good run. By 1873, the brewery supplied beer to the British military, along with pretty much everyone else in London, and it was the largest brewery in the world. Follow Brick Lane south to continue retracing Jack's footsteps. You will turn right onto Whitechapel High Street. Brick Lane is a tourist attraction today, known for its bustling multicultural foodie scene, interesting little shops, and street art. Some of the best Indian food in the world is right here. This street was once part of Whitechapel Lane, but when London burned in 1666, it was rebuilt and renamed Brick Lane because so many brickmakers came here to build their businesses. Breweries also thrived, and when Jack walked this road in 1888, the Brick Lane Brewery covered several acres of land. When Jack walked here, the brewery took up many blocks and extended far back from the road. By day, it was a bustling hub for industry, but at night, this was a dark and lonely stretch of road. The day workers were in their bed under their roofs, and the real citizens of Whitechapel were here on the streets, looking for a way to make money, perhaps seeking a cheap mug of beer or a plate of food. At least one was looking for something else entirely. These streets were dark and deep, even on the most moonlit nights. They were cold and harsh, even at the end of another hot London summer. They were dangerous all the time. But during the time of Jack the Ripper, they were deadly. We were truly at the epicenter of the crime spree that terrorized London in the fall of 1888. After the horrific murder of Annie Chapman in the very shadow of the rooming house she was calling home at the time, the autumn of terror had officially begun. Whitechapel had become Jack's neighborhood. Everyone was talking about his crimes, wondering who he was. Headlines screeched about him, and rumors swirled about his true name, a name that has yet to be revealed. In most of London, there were around 50 people living per acre. In parts of Whitechapel, that number shot up to 800 people per acre. Conditions were crowded and unsanitary and often unsafe. But the brutal nature of Jack's crimes made his work stand out even in this place where crimes were common. He was a monster in a neighborhood full of monsters. And he alone was without fear that September, the one and only person in all of Whitechapel who was not afraid of the killer stalking the streets. In fact, Jack's viciousness had only just started. The horrors he had created thus far were merely an appetizer, a small taste of what he was truly capable of. In the 3 weeks that followed Annie Chapman's death, while the whole of London walked more cautiously, Jack the Ripper was preparing to truly unleash his rage. We are heading toward Whitechurch Lane, which was named for the white church that once stood here, the very building that probably gave the Whitechapel area its name. Stay left on Whitechapel High Street and take a right to follow Whitechurch Lane. A church stood on Whitechurch Lane in Jack's time, but it was made of brick, just like most of the buildings here in the 1800s. The original white church had long since been rebuilt, and its story remains a bit of a mystery. A church with a white chalk exterior stood here as early as 1344, And this building, which was gone by Jack's time, gave Whitechapel its name. Notable residents buried in the churchyard include Richard Brandon, who is believed to be the man who carried out the execution of Charles I in the 1600s. Take a slight right on Goodman and stay on Alley. You'll take a left on Lehman and another left on Cable Street as we head toward the Jack the Ripper Museum. The Ripper Museum is dedicated to displaying what evidence there is of the true identity behind the man known as Jack the Ripper. In the century and a half since he committed his crimes, hundreds of names have been suggested as the identity behind the unknown, shadowy figure. Popular theories as to who lies behind the Ripper's true identity includes Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Queen Victoria's son, Prince Albert Victor, and Montague John Druitt, a barrister with a strong interest in medicine who took his own life 1 month after the last confirmed Ripper murder. Some believe that Jack may have actually been a Jill, proposing that the crimes were committed by a woman. By any name, the Whitechapel murderer was a monster. Down the street to the east, at Wilton's Music Hall, stands a nicer memory. This area was full of pubs and row houses before a music lover named John Wilton bought many of these properties to build his own project in 1859. His vision was a grand music hall, a place full of glamour and entertainment where London's East End could enjoy the finer things in life. The building is refurbished today and full of music again, but it had closed its doors by the Autumn of Terror in 1888. Whitechapel was not the type of place where glamour and music thrived. It was a place for the dangerous and the destitute. And when Jack the Ripper walked this way that September, the building was dark and abandoned. The shadows were deep and long, and the hunting grounds were open. Turn left onto Back Church Lane, then right onto Fairclough. You will take a left on Henrique. Walk down Henrique Street to the school and relive the horrors of a night when Jack let it all go and gave in to the fullest extent of his dark desires. Because the people of Whitechapel and all of London had only just experienced a taste of what he could do until the night of September 30th, 1888. The newspapers were already running with the story of the monster in Whitechapel, having dubbed the unknown killer the Whitechapel Fiend, the Whitechapel Murderer, and Leather Apron, due to the fact that inspectors thought he may have been a butcher by trade. Crime newspapers published highly detailed images, reimaginings of all aspects of the crimes. The Whitechapel killer was infamous, and very soon he would step from the shadows to tell the world his name. The corner of the street where a school now stands is where the body of Elizabeth Stride was found. She was discovered right around 1 a.m. when a jeweler driving his cart and horse down the street had trouble with his steed. The horse became noticeably skittish. It could not be prodded to move forward. That's when the jeweler saw the body on the ground, which he presumed at first to be a sleeping person or someone who was drunk. It was Elizabeth Stride. And though she was certainly dead, her body was still warm and intact. The odd behavior of the horse and condition of her body have led investigators to believe the jeweler came upon the crime in progress, and that Jack had only begun his grisly work when the unexpected driver and cart scared him away. Go north on Henrique and take a left onto Commercial Road, the street that changed Whitechapel forever, much as Jack did that September night. Elizabeth Stride had been seen in various points around Whitechapel the night of her death. Multiple witnesses saw her keeping company with a man, though the varying descriptions of this person suggest that Elizabeth was with multiple men that night. None of their identities are known, but we do know this. Only one of them was a killer. Only one of them was the monster known as Jack the Ripper. Take a right to stay on Commercial Street and follow it to Whitechapel High Street. Turn left when you reach it. During the reign of England's first Queen Elizabeth, there were two grand manors here, one of which was so lavish the Queen joked about leaving her hovel, the royal palace, to come and visit a true castle. Those grand estates were gone in Jack's time, destroyed partly in favor of the road we're walking on now. Commercial Street became a main thoroughfare and a hub for the East End. It was often busy with traffic and helped connect Whitechapel to the rest of the city. The manors gave way to early industries, and in Jack's time, there were many businesses in operation here. Years later, Gandhi came to see the area where so many Londoners worked in cramped, old buildings. When he was asked what he thought of the British civilization, he gave the tongue-in-cheek response that he would like to see it. During World War II, the street was largely filled with textile factories and other industries. It was also heavily bombed during the Blitzkrieg. Turn right onto Commercial again. Take a left back onto Whitechapel High Street. Jack's night was not over. Interrupted at his work, presumably, his blood fever was not abated. Elizabeth's stride was only his warm-up act. Frustrated and surrounded by the Whitechapel shadows, he went back to the hunt. He had plenty of potential victims to choose from. The people who lived here and spent time here had nowhere else to be, for nowhere else wanted them. Poor, forgotten, and alone. The women walked the streets, and here they were the hunters. They looked for lonely men whose troubles they could ease, just for an hour or so at a time. But Jack had flipped the script, and he wanted those women, and in fact, all of London, to know that he was the alpha predator of these streets. 3 days before his abbreviated murder of Elizabeth Stride, Jack the Ripper had decided to make his public debut. He sent a handwritten note to the Central News Agency. This is known as the Dear Boss letter. That's how it begins. Dear Boss.
I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me real fits. I am down on, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work, and I want to start again. I will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in the ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ear off and send to the police officers just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha.
You'll be taking a right at St. Botolph Street and then a left onto St. James's Passage. As you walk toward Madras Square Garden, think about the arrogance of this letter. Had the man who held Whitechapel in his grip truly mailed this? Many investigators believe this letter could be genuine, though many similar letters claiming to be from the killer had already been dismissed as hoaxes. The Dear Boss letter is the first time the name Jack the Ripper was ever used. It was a name that would go down in infamy. The pretty garden at Mitre Square is where the body of Catherine Eddowes was found, and this was a horrific scene. Eddowes had been placed in a jail cell earlier that very evening after being discovered to be too drunk to stand on her own around 8 p.m. She spent the night in a cell and was released at precisely 1 a.m. Eddowes bid the officers goodbye and was seen leaving in the direction of Aldgate, where she had been previously found earlier that night. She was seen by a witness exactly 35 minutes later talking with a man. Her body was found 10 minutes after that by a police constable right here near what is now a garden in a square, a quiet green space that still carries the shadows of the terror that was felt here. She was badly mutilated, with her inner organs pulled out of her body and gruesomely displayed on top of her. Catherine Eddowes was still warm and no stiffness had set in, which indicated that she had been alive up to 30 minutes before her discovery. Head northeast to take a right onto Dukes, then take a left on Middlesex and a right on Rose Tree Lane. Jack the Ripper's most famous piece of correspondence is known as the From Hell letter. It was sent, along with a wooden box, to George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, on October the 16th. At the top was written the words, "From Hell."
Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman and preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk.
The wooden box did indeed contain a kidney, consistent with the human kidney that had been cut from Catherine Eddowes. But in those days before DNA and blood type testing, it was not possible to determine whether this was, in fact, the victim's missing kidney. Take a left now onto Galston Avenue. At the corner of Galston and New Galston, you will see one of the only elements from Jack's time that is still here in Whitechapel. The Happy Days fish and chip shop is definitely modern, but the frame around the door was standing here while Jack terrorized the people of Whitechapel. This was also the exact spot where investigators found graffiti that may or may not be linked to the Whitechapel murders.
The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing.
That's what it said. It should be noted that the word Jews is spelled J-U-W-E-S, and overall, the phrasing is grammatically incorrect. Investigators paid close attention to this graffiti, not because of its hateful message, but because of what was found nearby. A piece of the apron worn by Catherine Eddowes that night was also right here on the ground near the doorway. Because of that piece of apron, we can say with a fair amount of certainty that Jack the Ripper stood right here the night of his double murder. Whether or not he wrote the message remains unknown. Head north on Galston toward Wentworth and continue on Bell Lane. We are perhaps retracing the footsteps of the killer himself, retracing the steps taken by many investigators, both professional and amateur alike. Hundreds of people have attempted to solve the Whitechapel murders, and some even say they have. But for now, and maybe for all time, the true identity of the Ripper remains unknown. Elizabeth Stride was 44 years old. Born in Sweden, she was known to be generally quiet and kind, though she could get a bit vulgar when she was drinking. She had a reputation for being good-natured. Her life was ended by Jack the Ripper. Catherine Eddowes was 46. She was born in the UK, in Wolverhampton, and was known to be highly intelligent, but with a bad temper. She had most of her belongings on her when she was murdered, including a small box of tea. Both women are buried in the City of London Cemetery. Take a right on White's Row and turn left. Your destination will be on the right. You are about to come face to face with Jack's last known crime scene, which was also his most gruesome. On November 9th, 1888, Mary Jane Kelly was found murdered in the small room she was renting near the corner of Brune and Toyney Streets. She was in her room at 1 a.m. and was spotted previously in the evening in the company of a man around the streets of Whitechapel. At that time, she appeared to be in good spirits, likely due to drinking heavily of spirits. She was singing and possibly intoxicated. She was heard singing in her room as well after midnight. The light was on, and Mary Jane Kelly was safe. But that would change as the night deepened around Whitechapel. She was seen again, this time around Dorset Street, in the company of a man who may have been the same one from earlier in the evening. She was spotted at 3 a.m., heading with him toward Miller's Court. At that time, she was alive and well. Mary Jane Kelly was never seen in this condition again. She was discovered in her own bed hours later at 10:45 a.m., badly mutilated. She was gutted. Pieces of her body had been cut off, and the scene was as ugly as anything you could imagine. Mary Jane Kelly was 25 years old. She was born in Limerick, Ireland. She was said to be very pretty and bilingual, as she spoke fluent Welsh. She is buried in St. Patrick's Catholic Cemetery in London. Head north on Brushfield Street and take a right, then take a left on Commercial Street. It will only take you about 2 minutes to find yourself in historic Old Spitalfields Market. This area was a marketplace back in the 1300s, as it is today. The market flourished after the Fire of London and became a hotspot for commerce. Today, it's famous for its amazing selection of food from all around the world, and it's the perfect place to unwind after walking through a murderous history as you have. So get a meal here if you like, and grab a pint at the 10 Bells Brewery nearby. The pub was often used by Jack the Ripper's victim and many other Whitechapel residents, though it has been updated since those days. I'm so glad you joined me on this walking tour of Whitechapel. If you like this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe so you can join me on more adventures all around the world. You will find all my sources for this video in the description box. And if you want to learn a whole lot more about visiting London, please check out my entire London playlist, which includes day trips away from the city of London. Thank you for watching, and thank you for taking this journey with me. Now, Voyager, sail forth to seek and find.